thank you all for being here. I know you guys are taking time away from your evenings, and probably a lot of us have had very busy days. So I hopefully we'll make this worth your while this evening. Basically, I want to do a full run through of the Azento process because, as Matt said, I've been involved with this for quite some time. So I really feel like I have a pretty good handle on this entire process. We're going to start with just going through a little bit of case selection, indications and contraindications for Azento. We'll run through all the steps that are going to be necessary to submit a case and to look through and approve a case or to make changes. And then we'll go through a couple surgeries so that everybody's totally clear on the surgical aspects of an Astra EV implant. So first of all, why guided surgery? And I think that a lot of us that have cone beam x-ray machines, as you start scanning patients and see patients that have had implants done over the years, it's very clear that there are a lot of implant misadventures that happen. And even with best of intentions and best planning and laying flaps, sometimes we just get the implant in the wrong place. And it's unfortunate for the patient, and it's very, very stressful for the doctor. And we end up with these cosmetic nightmares. So I think that even though some surgeons are, especially ones that have been placing implants for a lot of years, feel like they can do their cases successfully non-guided, there's just no way to consistently have an excellent result. And that's really where Azento comes in for us. So I just want to take a second to talk about biology, because this is, Azento is not a magic pill, and it's not something that's going to solve all of our problems. And I hope all of you watching tonight will recognize this picture, that these are bad outcomes and these are not what we're shooting for. Bottom line is, if we don't have the biology there, if we don't have the keratinized tissue, if we don't have the bone, doing guided surgery is not going to be helpful. We need to create those conditions first. So make sure we're using proper implant treatment planning, proper diagnosis. We're looking for healthy, good tissue. If we don't have it, then we need to create it. Otherwise, it's just going to be compromised no matter what system you end up doing. So with Azento, you are able, and I get this question a lot, are you able to do an immediate implant placement? In other words, an extraction case where we send our scans, the tooth is still present, but we want to plan the case to remove the tooth and then to place our implant at the time of extraction. Understand that when this case is planned for you, the Azento team is not looking at what potentially could or couldn't happen. They're not going to decide for you if this implant should happen. They're just going to say that it could happen. That's for you to make a determination. And if it's an anterior case and we have very, very thin buccal bone and we might potentially lose that buccal plate, we need to be aware, again, paying proper attention to treatment planning. We need to have enough space. It's not going to do you a favor to submit a case to Azento and then later find out, oh, we went through this whole process, we don't have enough room to restore the implant, even though we have enough bone to place the implant. And some of us aren't necessarily used to looking at that. So how much space do we need? Typically, if we're looking at interocclusal, if we want to have a really easy to restore implant and a nice cosmetic result, we need about 7 millimeters of space. So before you ever submit a case, take a quick look at that. Make sure we have that. If you don't have that 7 millimeters of space, is there anything you can do? That's a time for a conversation with our patient. If the upper tooth is super erupted into that lower space, that's the time to say, hey, maybe we need to do a crown on your opposing tooth, or maybe we need to orthodontically intrude, any number of things. But these are the discussions that need to happen before the implant is ever placed. That's not the time to do it. And this patient may have all the bone in the world, and sometimes we have tunnel vision and we're just looking at bone, but we need to make sure that we don't make these sort of errors. And the great thing about Azento is that one of the parts of the plan is that you will have your restorative component. And really there's no way for you to run into this trouble where the implants are placed and now you realize there's not restorative room. So we also need interproximal space. Typically, about 7 millimeters is ideal for interproximal space. And really where we get that number from, if we want to have our implant and we want to position it about 1.5 millimeters away from the adjacent teeth, and our implant is going to be maybe approximately 4 millimeters in diameter, that's going to take us to about 7 millimeters of space. So again, if you measure that and we don't have that, that is the time before you scan your patient, before you upload your case to Azento. Is there anything I need to do to recreate that space? Am I going to recontour a composite on the adjacent tooth? Are we potentially going to crown an adjacent tooth? So just pay attention to all of those things. I know we're all excited to submit the cases, and we're sort of looking for those ideal ones, but take a second to follow your treatment planning that you've all learned. And just in a nutshell, these are the numbers that I think a lot of us will agree with. Implants that are positioned adjacent to each other, ideally we want about 3 millimeters of space. Implants positioned next to natural teeth, about 1.5 millimeters, and anywhere from 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters away from the buccal plate. Anterior ones, as close to 2 millimeters as I can get is what I'm looking for. And then our depth of our implant, we're typically about 3 to 4 millimeters apical to our gingival restorative margin. So the first decision you're going to have to make as you're doing a case and you're submitting this, because once you submit your case on the Azento order form, it's going to ask you, would you like a punch? Some people believe that if they're doing guided surgery and we know where the bone is and we know where the implant is going, every guided surgery case is a punch. Please be cognizant of the amount of keratinized tissue you have. If you're going to do a punch, make sure that you're going to be left with a couple millimeters of tissue. Otherwise, do some sort of a small flap, reflect the tissue, save that keratinized tissue, because once you remove it with a punch, it's difficult to try and bring that back. When you order an Azento case, you do have the option of not just having a custom healing abutment, we can also have a restorative component as well. So we can have an abutment and a temporary crown fabricated for us. You're going to need to choose, if you want that, you're going to need to choose between a screw retain restoration or a cemented restoration. If you do choose in your Azento order to order a temporary crown, even though you may not necessarily use it in the case, the advantage of that is that they're also going to send you the core file, which we'll talk about a little bit later for doing the final restoration for the implant. That core file will not be sent unless you order a temporary crown with the case. So I typically am going to shoot for a screw retain restoration, and that's my go-to. And people will sometimes lean one way or the other, but certainly for the temporary, I would much prefer to do screw retain so that we can cement these components extraorally, and we're not messing with cement at a surgical site. When you're doing a screw retain restoration, though, we do need to be aware that these potentially can be more difficult to see. And certainly we're going to want to make sure that our implant plan is going to follow a parallel surface to our adjacent teeth. So what I mean by that is that if we're inserting an abutment that has indexing into an implant, we have to make sure that that index or that implant is going to be parallel to the contacts of the adjacent teeth. With those two paths of insertion, if they're not parallel to each other, it's going to be very difficult to see. Those are the cases where you end up adjusting the contacts because the restoration is not going in, and finally it goes in, but now you end up with an open contact. So if we have a plan that looks like that, it's going to need to be a cement restoration. This is not a screw retain type of restoration, or you're going to struggle trying to seat that. So let's jump into the actual Azento process. And as Matt mentioned, we're going to have question and answer at the end. So by all means, we'll leave enough time. And I want to make sure that we're totally clear on all the steps that we need to do to successfully submit a case. So first thing, if you haven't submitted a case yet and you've not worked with Azento, we need to log into Sirona Connect at least one time. So you do actually need to come up with your password. That may be the hardest part of the whole process, is finding that password. But we're going to go under your account. We're going to look at favorite recipients, and we're going to need to add Dentsply Sirona implants as a favorite recipient. If you don't do that, then that lab won't show up in your CEREC Connect when you go to submit your scan. Next thing you're going to need to do is also under my account, if you haven't done it already, you're going to click on external portals, and you're going to find Dentsply Sirona implants, and you'll click the link button. That's the same process. Some of you with CEREC have already linked your accounts with Invisalign. The process is basically the same idea as that. So once you hit link, you'll just enter your credentials for Dentsply Sirona implants. So you have a couple different options. When your patient comes in and you want to do your optical scan, if you're using CEREC, you can either open CEREC Connect or you can open the chairside 4.6 software, capture all of your imaging in that software, and then click on the Connect button afterwards to send the scans. But if you're opening CEREC Connect, you're going to see Dentsply Sirona implants as in your administration screen as one of the potential labs that you're going to send the case to. So if you select Dentsply Sirona implants, then you're going to need to choose between two different restoration types. Even though we're going to be restoring an implant, we want to select crown, not implant. It doesn't matter if you put full contour or veneer, but we want to select the crown because as you go to your imaging screen, you're now only going to have 3 catalogs. If you accidentally put implant as the type of restoration you're making, you're going to end up with a 4th scan body catalog. And it's not a big deal. You would just need to move the jaw that you're going to be restoring and copy and paste it into the scan body catalog. But if we just select crown, we're not going to have that issue. So we're going to do a full arch scan for our upper, lower, and our buccal bite. It's critical that we do a full arch scan. And some people say, well, my goodness, do we need to use the Ortho software for that? Absolutely, you can if you like. You can use the Ortho software and you could submit this to Dentsply Sirona implants that way. But I can tell you that I've done many, many cases and all of them have been scanned in either chairside or in Connect. And my guides have fit perfectly. So I feel completely comfortable doing a full arch scan with a guide that's going to fit well in the Connect or the chairside software. So this, keep in mind, this is not just for your plan. We need to make sure that we're going to have a guide that's going to fit accurately on here. So you need to capture the contacts of the adjacent teeth. You need to capture the embrasures. We need to make sure that we have a very, very clear scan for the guide to fit on, not just the planning. So once you submit this case to Dentsply Sirona implants, there's just a couple of additional things that you might not be used to seeing. One of them is solution details. And under solution details, some of you that have submitted cases to Atlantis before, you'll see the Atlantis solution detail, but now there's a new Azento solution. So we're going to click on the Azento solution, and you also need to click on a return date. So that's all we need to do for our optical scan. We'll create our full arch scan. We'll submit that through CEREC Connect or the 4.6 software, and we'll send that through to Dentsply Sirona implants. They'll have that image. Now we're just going to take a cone beam image on our patient. If you have a Galileos or a Dentsply Sirona type of cone beam imaging, you'll see the workflow with that. But really any sort of cone beam, as long as it's a universal DICOM format, that's all we're looking for to be able to submit a case. You want to make sure you have a clean scan. And I can tell you that I have sent many scans that have a lot of metal, a lot of scatter, and really the results have been fantastic. So I'm not overly worried about having some metal restorations in these scans. But once you take your cone beam for your patient, we need to export a DICOM format. And this is critical that we do this in a DICOM format. So if you're using Dentsply Sirona as your software, this is Sidexis 4.2 that you're looking at. Some of you may have older versions of the Sidexis software, but somewhere along the way you'll see an output button. The bottom red arrow is what I prefer to click. It's volume for third-party manufacturer. And if you click on that volume for third-party manufacturer, then it's going to export and it's going to create a folder that has a DICOM file in it. You can also do a DICOM exam report. And if you don't have the button, some of the older versions of Sidexis don't have that third-party volume. Once you click on export for third-party volume, it's going to ask you the format for the third-party volume. Not critical, but if this does pop up, you'll click Simplant for that. So what's going to happen is then it's going to ask you for a folder, and you're just going to name a folder on your desktop where it's going to send that DICOM file to. So if you click on the folder, once it exports and saves it, you're going to see 2 files in there. You're going to see a DICOM DIR and you're going to see a DICOM RM. This format, this file is not uploadable to Azento in the way it sits. You're going to need to zip this, and this is critical if you're using Sidexis or Dentsply Sirona equipment. you need to compress this file before you can upload it. So you can either compress the entire DICOM RM file, and that's totally fine to do, and I'll show you how to do that, but if you compress the entire file, it becomes fairly large and it just takes a little bit longer to upload. My preference is to click on the DICOM RM until you see the CT1 file. And once that CT1 file pops up, that's what we're going to highlight, and we're going to send it to a compressed or zipped folder. So as soon as you send it to a compressed or zipped folder, you're going to end up with 3 files. So now you're going to have your DICOM RM. The CT1 file is where the actual slices, where the actual cone beam slices are. So if we zip that, it's just going to be a smaller package to upload. Again, it's totally fine to go to the DICOM RM file and do that. So once we have all of our data collected on our patient, then we're going to log into orderdigitalsolutions.com. And once you log in, you're going to have the option to hit Order Now under Azento. So when you click on that, you're going to come up with your prescription. There's only a couple things that we need to fill out in our prescription. You're just going to need to name your case. Doesn't really matter what you call it. And then from here, we're going to tell them, are we treating the mandible or the maxilla? We're going to choose the implant position that we're planning the case. And if you are doing an immediate extraction case, this is where you let them know. So you would click on the same tooth that needs to be virtually removed. Then you're going to need to decide if you just want to do a custom healing procedure. So they'll just send you a custom healing abutment, or you're going to choose an immediate temporization procedure. If you choose that, then you have the option between a titanium or a gold colored abutment. And then you have the option of a cement retained or a screw retained restoration. Again, I normally like a screw retained for this. And then you're just going to choose the color for your restoration. And then we're just going to choose between one of 2 implants, either an Astra EV or a Xive implant. When you hit next, now we're going to upload that data that we collected. If you didn't scan through CEREC Connect, you can always take an STL file that you just happen to save on your computer, or if you use a different imaging system and have a generic STL file, you can always upload that. But if you did scan through Sirona Connect, you would just click on that, and then when you choose scan, all the scans that you submitted to them will be there. You simply find that patient and hit attach, and it'll automatically upload very quickly. This is where we're going to take our zip file now. So we're going to take either our DICOM RM zip or our CT1 zip, and now that's going to upload. If you don't zip that file, you're not going to be able to upload it. It's just, you'll start clicking on it, and it'll just keep opening from one folder to the next. I did edit mine, by the way, so it uploaded a little bit faster for this video. It'll take probably about a minute or so. Once everything uploads, you'll simply click on your limitation of liability, and you'll hit place order. And that's important because what Azento is telling you is that you kind of need to plan your case. You need to understand the biology. You need to understand what's happening with that case. They're just going to position the implant in the most ideal restorative position, but you're the one that needs to understand the biology here. Once you click on place order, you're going to get an order number, and that order number is something that you're going to be able to click on to be able to track your order to see when it's shipping and everything and how long it's coming. So from the moment you hit submit and you get your order number, about a day later, you're going to get an email that says you've got a plan ready and you're ready to review that plan. So when you click on that plan and you're ready to review it, the first warning that's going to pop up, or a message that's going to pop up, it's going to let you know that with an Astra EV implant, the drilling that's going to happen, the osteotomy drills are going to always drill a millimeter deeper than what your implant position is going to be. And that's important because you're going to have the ability to edit this plan to change it. And you need to make sure that if you are editing it, you keep that in mind as you're getting close to vital structures, that you will be drilling a millimeter deeper. So when your plan comes up, I like to look at the restorative piece of it first. I sort of ignore the implant position. I go through the restoration because, as we know, our patients don't want implants, they want teeth. We have the option to turn off and on any of the components of our plan. We can take the translucency slider and change that so that we can look through the tissue and see where our margins are. But I really want to take a good look and make sure, am I happy with this restoration? If the implant ends up in this position, am I happy with it? I can look at the abutment, I can look at the crown, I can click on the custom healing abutment, I can see how tall above the tissue that's going to sit if I'm going to be making a flipper or some other sort of a temporary and not attached to the implant directly. If I'm doing a cement retained restoration, I can see how deep is my margin on my abutment going to be. If I'm doing screw retained, then it's going to be less important because I'm going to bond these two pieces extraorally. But I'm really, even though we're just in the planning stage for the implant, I'm trying to keep in mind what is my final restoration going to be. Once I'm happy with that, we're going to look at the actual implant plan itself. And you'll notice that all of the vital structures, the nerve, the adjacent teeth, everything's going to be highlighted in orange for you. So you have a pretty good idea if you're getting too close to something that you shouldn't. On the right side of the screen, you're also going to see a safety window hovered around that hashed window around your implant. So we want to keep that in mind. But you can also turn on your restorative components here as well. So you can get a feel for how subosseous your restorative components are going to be. And that's also helpful in just getting a feel for where your restoration is going to sit. So from here, we're going to have the ability to also look at the planned surgical guide. We want to see where that indexing is because that indexing is going to be key during the surgery. And we're going to see if there is an ability for Azento on a posterior tooth to do a slot in the guide so that it becomes easier access. You'll be able to see that there. We can also scroll through the 2D x-ray of our plan and make sure that we're happy with the amount of bone that surrounds the implant in 360 degrees. And then from here, we can have a measuring tool. There's a ruler on here, which is sometimes helpful if you want to have an idea where your implant platform is to the restorative margin. We can sort of take those measurements and get a feel. So none of this has to be done, but you have all of these options in your plan to be able to do that and to take a look at it. And then finally, we also have just a panoramic view if we just want to get a broad global look at our entire plan. So once you go through your plan, you've got a couple of options. You can either say, no, I want to change it, or I'm happy with everything the way it is. So if you decide to click on the approve button, the second red arrow on the bottom, and you click on approve, then it's going to give you a window that says, if you do approve this treatment, it's going into production. We're done. There's really no changing that's going to occur at this point. So make sure you are happy with that plan before you click on approve. And once you do, then fabrication starts. Alternatively, you can say, well, I want to make some changes. And there are two different ways to make changes. You can either type in the dialog box on the top arrow, and you can say anything you want. You might say, well, I want a more narrow diameter implant, or I want a shorter implant, or a longer implant. You can also talk about the restorative components, how you want your crown changed, where you want your margins positioned. Any of that can just be typed into that dialog box, and then a new plan will be made. Typically, any changes you make, it's going to take about 24 hours before a new plan is developed and ready to go for you. The other option is you can say, well, I kind of want to move that implant myself, so you can modify that proposal, which is the second arrow. When you do that, for now, it's going to open a second software that you'll need to download. It'll prompt you to if you don't have it, called Implant Editor. And once it opens that second software package, now you're going to have a similar view with the restoration, with the implant, but now you're going to have some tools to allow you in real time to be able to move that implant anywhere you like. So you can reposition that implant if you're not happy with the way it's been planned, if you feel it's too deep or too shallow. You can also change that implant and try in different implants and take a look. So we can just click on whether it's a more narrow or shorter implant, or if we want to try in a profile implant and see how that's going to look in the plan. Once you've made the changes that you like, you're going to need to approve and upload that arrow on the left. So once you approve and upload that case, that now is going to go into Azento, and they'll be able to manufacture your case with the new plan. So about a week from when you submit your case, this box shows up in the office, and people ask me, well, how long do I wait? When do I schedule my patients? I normally, if I scan my patient on a Monday, then I'm doing surgery Wednesday or Thursday the following week. That's my typical workflow. You will have tracking numbers with your order, so you'll know exactly where this is in the delivery process. But inside the box is going to be everything you planned, everything you ordered. When we take a look in there, we're going to have all the drills that we need for this case. And we're just going to have the drills for this particular implant length and implant diameter. We're not going to have any extra drills. We're going to have the implant that we selected. The surgical guide is going to be there. If you only ordered a custom healing abutment procedure, then that will be in there. If you also ordered a temporary crown, then you're going to still have the custom healing abutment, but then you'll have in addition to it an abutment and the PMMA temporary crown as well. So one of the coolest things about the entire Azento process is that if you choose to place a custom healing abutment in, you know that when you go to restore that implant, the tissue is going to heal to the contours that you pre-selected. You'll notice that in this image, the contours, the subgingival contours, are exactly the same. They're milled, they're manufactured exactly the same between the abutment and the custom healing abutment. So let's take a look at the drills and the sequence with drills, because that really is a critical part of this. And I know some people are new to Azento, but they're also new to Astra EV. So we want to understand the drilling protocol because it is a little bit unique compared to other systems that you might have used. In a nutshell, we're going to have three different segments of the osteotomy, three different parts to the osteotomy. The first part, and we'll look at this in greater detail, but the first part of the osteotomy is going to be the drilling protocol into the cancellous or the spongus bone. So depending on the recipe that you have, and it's going to be included in your case, and depending on the diameter of the implant, it's going to give you a sequence of the initial osteotomy drills. For example, the 4.2, and this is for a straight implant as opposed to a conical. The recipe is going to call for drill number 1, number 3, and number 4. So those are required steps. The next step is going to also be a required step, and that's going to be for widening the cortical portion. So where the neck of your implant torques into the cortical bone, that's what we're going to be preparing next. And then finally, we have some optional drills that we're going to be using depending on how dense that bone is. So I just want to throw this slide up here just so you can have an idea of this. You are, depending on the length of the implant you choose, they're going to send you one of 3 different length drills. So for example, a 13 millimeter implant, they're going to send you 27 millimeter drills to place that implant. Keep that in mind. If you're doing an implant on tooth number 18, and the Azento team says, oh my gosh, you got so much bone, you have enough bone for a 13 millimeter implant, we'll plan a 13 millimeter implant in there. Understand that unless your patient is going to be able to unhinge their lower jaw and be able to place a 27 millimeter drill in there for the guided surgery, that might not be the best implant length. So it's not just the amount and volume of bone we have, but it's also the location of the implant and the length of the drill that we're going to be typically using. So the shorter the implant, the shorter the drill, and the easier the amount of room and space you're going to have for your guided surgery. So the very first 2 steps that you're going to do, if you're doing a punch, and as I talked about before, as long as you have enough keratinized tissue, that's my preferred way to go. The first 2 drills, the punch drill and the initial drills, don't have sleeves on them. So there are line markings that you need to pay attention to depending on the length implant that you selected. I kind of ignore that, honestly, with the tissue punch, and I just place my tissue punch into the guide, and I just push it until it doesn't go anymore because I'm hitting bone. The initial drill, I do use the line markings, and you're going to see a big black line on there, and the bottom or the apical portion of that line is going to be for implants of 8, 11, or 15 millimeters, and then the upper one is going to be for 6, 9, or 13. So it's a little bit counterintuitive that a shorter implant or a longer implant may be very, very different lines. They don't necessarily correspond to shorter or longer lines. So let's take a look at the sequence of drills. The first set of drills that you're going to use, and again, it's going to be the recipe that you're following, so you may not use all of these drills. The first set of drills are going to have a sleeve attached to them. That sleeve is going to fit on fairly snug to the apical part of the drill, but it does slide up and down that drill. The next set of drills don't have a sleeve attached to it. The next set of drills, we're going to be using the lines, and we'll look at that in a second. And keep in mind again, the first spongeous bone preparation drills are required. The cortical bone drills are also required. I'm normally going to choose between, and you have the choice of either using an A drill or a B drill. Either one is fine to use. Most of the time for me, it's going to be an A. That just depends. That's going to be thinner cortical bone. If my first drill feels like I'm drilling in a concrete, or if I'm in the mandibular anterior part of the jaw and I know that it's just going to be really, really dense cortical bone, then I'll go to a B. But most of the time for me, it's going to be an A, unless it just really feels dense. If you're using a conical implant, it's not going to be the choice of an A or a B drill. It's going to be a single drill, but you're going to be using either the lower or the upper line. And we'll look at that more closely as well. Those are all required steps. The final drill is just to widen the osteotomy. The V or the X drills, these are the optional drills. And these are the drills that, depending on how dense the bone is, you may choose to use that. So if we look at the lines on our A and B drills, you'll see that it's very similar to the tissue punch, and it's similar to the initial drill that you can use. You're going to have technically 3 different lines, 2 black lines and a silver line in the middle. So we're going to only use the most apical line, again, in our A and B drills. If we're using implants of 8, 11, or 15, a 6 millimeter implant will be the middle line, and then 9 through 13 is going to be the upper line. And these are for straight implants. So you have the choice. If you're placing a straight implant, you have the choice between an A or B drill. If you're placing a conical implant, then it's only one drill that's either A or B, depending on which line you would do. So in other words, if my cortical bone is not that dense, then I'm going to drill just to the A line. If it's very dense, I'll continue drilling to the B line. And understand that's strictly with conical implants, not with straight implants. That'll be on the recipe. You won't be able to make that mistake that I grabbed the wrong one, because it won't be included in your kit. So let's understand the actual preparation. And this was very, very confusing to me. And I think these graphics, and I hope you guys will understand this and get a feel for it. The initial bone preparation that we do is going to always undersize the entire osteotomy. And you see the image on the left with the yellow bar. The entire osteotomy is undersized. The apical portion is a different amount of undersized than the middle part and the coronal part, but the entire thing is undersized. When you choose the acortical drill, it's going to take just that cortical portion, just the most coronal portion of your osteotomy. It's still going to leave it undersized, but instead of being a 0.5 millimeter undersized, it's only 0.3 millimeters undersized. It's not going to touch the other 2/3 of the implant, just that coronal part. In very, very dense cortical bone that has no give at all, the B drill is going to eliminate the undersizing entirely. So the diameter of your osteotomy is going to be equivalent to the diameter of your implant. So there's no way for the implant to get hung up on that cortical bone when it's going in. Again, required drills, sponges and cortical bone, all required drills. When you make the decision for a V or an X, for me, unless it's type 4 bone in the posterior maxilla where I feel like my drill just drops in, it feels like styrofoam. Unless it's that, I'm always going to grab a V drill. And what the V drill is going to do, if you see the initial undersized osteotomy marked in blue on the left, that initial undersized osteotomy, the V drill is just going to take that apical portion, and it's still going to leave it a little bit undersized, but not very much. And most of the time, that's what I'm going to go with. So my normal drilling sequence is going to be to use an acortical drill, unless the bone's super, super dense. And then I'm going to use a V drill of the optional drill just to widen out the apical portion just a little bit. And then I'm going to try to see my implant. If my implant doesn't go to depth and I feel that it's binding, that's when I'm typically going to come in with my X drill. And you're going to notice that it's going to take the other 2/3 of the osteotomy, and it's going to reduce the amount that it's undersized as well. So ask me after there's not questions. I want to make sure we're clear with that. The implant driver also, we need to be clear that there are 2 line markings on that. So when you place your implant, you're going to choose either the lower line or the upper line depending on the length of your implant. And I'll show you that in greater detail in just a minute. So the way my package comes, my Azento case is there. My assistant is going to grab the drills out of the box, and they're going to position them in my small surgical kit. And the cool thing is, it's just the drills I need for that case. You're not going to be able to make a mistake. And whether you're doing a straight implant or a conical implant and the drilling sequence is a little bit different, there's no way to make a mistake because those drills are just there. And then you're just going to work through in sequence from the tissue punch to the initial drill, follow the recipe, and when you're out of drills, you're done with your osteotomy. You're going to have a surgical guide that's going to be on a printed model, and we want to pay close attention to where that indexing is on the surgical guide. We want to make sure that when we position it into the patient's mouth that we can see that, because that's going to be the key to having our restorative components fit. Just very quickly showing you just a couple key points of surgery, and we'll run through a full surgery in a second. When you place your osteotomy drill, your spongeous osteotomy drill into the guide with the sleeve attached, that sleeve sometimes can slip to the hub of the drill. We want to make sure that the sleeve engages the guide first. So if the sleeve slips down and it's touching the hub of the drill, then the first part of your osteotomy is not going to be guided. You're going to have play within your drill. So the sleeve goes in first, and then you seat it until it stops. When you pick up your implant, and probably the most difficult part for me of the entire surgery is using the implant driver and having it engage in the implant and feeling it click into the implant, because it only will engage your implant one way. So make sure that that implant is fully engaged with your driver before you pull it out of the package. When we're placing our implant in, we're paying attention to the indexing on the driver and the indexing on the guide. We want to make sure that as our implant is seated, that that index on the driver and the guide is the same. If they don't match up, then the restorative components that you had prefabricated are not going to fit. We also need to pay attention to the vertical position. There is not a vertical stop when you're placing your implant. So again, if I'm placing an implant of 11 millimeters, then I'm going to use that first line on the driver. If this implant were and again, this is a little counterintuitive, if it were a 9 millimeter implant, then I would continue to seat my implant or my implant until I was on the closer to the hub of my drill. And then again, you have the option to place your custom healing abutment, or if you fabricated an abutment and a temporary crown, you can place those in. A word of caution: use good sense if you're placing a temporary in. If my temporary looks like a perfect tooth, then it's too big, it's too long. I tell my patients, these are going to look like baby teeth. They're going to be short. They're going to be way out of occlusion. I want no chance of my patient being able to touch this. And yes, they are leaving with a short tooth. That's okay. If you make it look beautiful, they're going to function on it, and then it's a recipe for disaster with a temporary. If you don't typically place temporaries and it's not your philosophy to do that, don't place a temporary on your implant. So let's run through step by step of our guided surgery here. This is a patient that I was placing implants on both 5 and 12, and I picked this patient just simply so I can go back and forth in photos to 2 different surgery sites. But we did a full arch scan, made sure everything was clear with my scan. Again, this was scanned in Cerec Connect. I did my cone beam and I submitted all of that just the way I showed you before. This is trying in my guide. You will find that these seat nicely. There's a really nice firm fit. There's no rock to them. They are probably the nicest fitting guides I've ever seen. So I'm going to start with my punch. In this particular case, I wanted to punch it, so I just pushed it until it didn't go anymore. And then I like to remove my guide, take a curette, and just clean off that tissue. And then I go with my initial drill. I'm paying attention to the line on my initial drill because there's not a stop on it. And now you can see that sleeve. This is drill number 1. You can see my sleeve attached to it. I make sure that that sleeve goes in first and it's not sliding up my drill. And then I seat that fully into the osteotomy. I'm going to do the same thing with drill number 3. And in this particular recipe, it called for drill number 4 for my final spongeous osteotomy drill. My personal preference is that in between each drill, I do remove the guide, I do irrigate, and I do curette, because there's lots of bone chips that are going to be in there that are going to clog up the osteotomy. it's impossible to irrigate too much. So I'd much rather overdo it with irrigation and curetting to make sure that my site is clean. So I'm typically doing this in between each one of my drills. After I'm done with my initial drills, I'm going to run in with my cortical. This was the cortical drill. I chose the A drill. So you can see as I seated it, I ended it just at the apical portion of that first black line. From here, I use my optional drill V. Again, that's my typical workflow. This one does have a stop on it, so I'll seat it until it hits my physical stop. And then we place the implant. My personal preference is to use a handpiece, and I use my handpiece to place my implant. Some people prefer to do it manually with a driver. Either way is totally fine. But as my implant is going in, I'm paying attention to that indexing. I'm watching it. And I more care about my vertical position first. I'll place my implant with my handpiece, and once I have my vertical position lined up to where I want it, then I start paying attention to my indexing notches. That's when I'll remove my handpiece and I'll place on a driver to do this manually. Understand that if I passed, as in this scenario, if I went past my indexing by just a little bit, I'm probably going to reverse it and go counterclockwise to line it up. People worry about, well, my gosh, I'm going to unseat my implant or seat it too deep. If you've missed it by 180 degrees, which is as much as you can possibly miss it by, a half a rotation is only going to either seat or unseat your implant by 0.3 millimeters. I would normally err on the side of seating it a little bit deeper, providing there's no vital structures. It's just going to make it, I'd much rather have my implant just a bit deeper than too shallow for my restorative components. And then I'm going to attach my torque wrench so that we can measure this, and I'll line up and make sure that my indexing. So first I take care of my vertical, and then I make sure that my indexing is lined up. Ideally, we're shooting for a maximum of 45 Newton centimeters. If my implant starts locking out and I can't seat it and I'm getting way past 45 Newton centimeters, then I'm going to back it out. And instead of just my V optional drill, I'm going to go to my X optional drill to widen my osteotomy and then come back in manually to place it. We're going to have our implant placed, and then pay attention when you place your custom healing abutment on. Make sure that it's not putting too much pressure on the tissue. So it's okay if it compresses a little bit and we get a little bit of blanching in the tissue, but I want after a couple minutes for that blanching to start to disappear and to go away. If it doesn't go away, then I'm going to relieve some of that tissue, maybe with a small incision around it, so we don't end up with some tissue necrosis with too much pressure. The dimple that's going to be on your custom healing abutment is always going to be towards the lingual. So, and these do only seat in one position. So what I'll typically do, even though I might want to send my patient off with a custom healing abutment, if I've ordered an abutment and a temporary crown, this is my chance to try it on. I'm going to try on my abutment. I want to see where those margins are. I want to try on my crown, and I want to say, here's my first look. I just did my surgery, and I want to see, is my core file that I'm going to receive and the abutment I have, is this something that I'm going to be able to use in this case, assuming everything heals well? This was a cement retained restoration. The best chance that I would have typically would be to do a screw retained restoration, because I can have my margins placed much more apically, and I don't worry as much if I have a little bit of tissue recession. But at least I'm going to have a chance, and I'm going to know at the time of surgery, am I going to be able to end up in a situation where I'm going to use that abutment and I'm going to be able to use that core file. But I'll probably still send my patient off on a posterior tooth with a custom healing abutment. Once they've healed, I'm going to be able to come back in, and I'm going to be able to open my original plan. And from that original plan, I'm going to be able to, assuming I ordered a temporary crown and an abutment, I'm going to have access to a core file. If I go into that plan and I click on the core file, I'm going to see 5 different formats. If I'm using a CEREC, then the one I want is a DXD file. So if I click on that, it's going to start to download. You simply take that DXD file and you drag and you drop it into your CEREC. As soon as you drag and drop it into the CEREC, it's going to open on your administration screen. You'll just fill in the case details, what design mode you want, what material you want, and so forth. And then you're just going to design a crown in the normal way. So understand that this core file is a virtual image of your abutment already attached to the model. That's the abutment that I just tried on during surgery. So I was just able to verify by my eye that, yeah, that looks like it's going to work really well. so I have an idea if I'm going to be able to use that core file. Worst case scenario, if I can't, I'm going to put on an IO flow and I'm going to have an Atlantis abutment made at this point. And then we have a patient where she was wearing a custom healing abutment, tissue healed well, and now we go directly to the core file. No imaging was done with any of this. This was all based on the plan, and final restoration was created off of the core file. So I've got a little bit longer, and I appreciate all of your patience, but I think I'm going to exit out of this, and hopefully I'm going to be able to see some questions, and we can do some question and answer with this.
Very good.
And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I think, if I can figure it out. And I think that is there.
Great, Dan. All right, thank you. That was excellent. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Very good. Well, so really appreciate an excellent presentation, and we have a couple of questions that have been posted. And if anyone else has a question, please type it into the Q&A area, and we'll queue them up. So the first question was from Sonia Mae Langton-Yanowitz. She said, when you take the CBCT scan, this was back sort of when you were talking about your uploading your scans, does the patient need to wear an open bite splint during the scan?
Yeah, great question. No, it's not necessary. Depending on the scan you use, for me, we use a bite tab that automatically opens the patient's arch a little bit. I have an XG3D. I would probably recommend not having the patient in full occlusion when you do the scan, but you don't necessarily have to make some sort of an appliance to keep them in a certain position.
Very good. Okay, second question then from Dr. Mary Bernardi. She said, I'd like to place an implant in the number 30 area, but number 31 is missing and number 32 is present. Would Azento be able to make a guide for this situation?
I have done those kind of scenarios. As long as you're only planning one guide hole in one implant position, then absolutely. As long as you have enough teeth in the arch to stabilize the guide, they'll do it. I've probably pushed the envelope maybe farther than everybody felt comfortable with on a couple of cases, but absolutely you can still do that.
Okay, very good. Dr. Thomas Foley, what are the differences for this procedure using non-CEREC scanners?
It makes no difference. You just need some sort of a generic STL format. So as long as you can do a scan and you can save on your computer an STL format of your upper or your lower jaw and the buccal bite, then you'll simply, if you remember in that first part of the video, you can just pull those off of your computer and upload any sort of an optical scan.
Very good. Dr. Melissa Rosello, can we do guides with multiple implants?
Yes, as long as you make multiple guides. So as of right now, this is a single tooth replacement system. So you cannot place two side-by-side implants with one guide.
Very good. Yeah. Dr. Thomas Foley, are there seat windows in the printed guide?
Yes. There'll be seat windows that you'll see. They're really the windows that I've noticed on mine are all around the actual osteotomy hole. So we won't have them further over on the other side of the guide. Typically the guide's 3/4 of an arch, but they seat incredibly well. It's just really not an issue verifying fit with these. A CEREC guide too, for example, sometimes those fit really loose, sometimes they fit kind of snug, and you really need that verification. You're just not going to find that issue with these guides.
Very good. So Dr. Luis Mireles, I hope I pronounced his name correctly. It would be great if Dr. Butterman could explain the matching process between the driver index and the surgical guide index.
Yes. So if we were to think back on the presentation and in looking at images, I believe we will have on the website the two components that we're looking for. The vertical line that we talked about, you've got one of two different vertical lines that we're going to have on the implant driver. That's going to be flush with the very top of your surgical guide. So you want to make sure that one of those two lines is flush. And then you're going to have several different indexing notches that are on your driver. Only one of them is quite large. The others are very small. and that one indexing notch is going to line up with the exact same indexing notch that's been both cut into the metal part of the sleeve and cut into the acrylic on the guide. Once you're placing it, you'll be able to see as you rotate those in that they line up. If it's at a difficult angle further back in the patient's mouth, you can just take a perio probe and line up the perio probe with the indexing on the driver and the indexing on the guide, just so that you have a better visual that you can see that those coincide.
Dr. Janet Rice asks, will Azento have a Tiebase eventually?
I would say the Tiebase components are specific to a CEREC workflow, and that's within the CEREC system to tie into a Tiebase. With the Azento workflow, this is tied into an Atlantis solution. So one of the wonderful things about this system is that you're having prefabricated components, and we're having titanium milled components prefabricated for us. So I would say that likely there will not be an individual Tiebase that comes through Azento, although the individual implants that we're using, such as Astra EV, those will have Tiebases available. It just won't go through the Azento system.
Very good questions here. Let's see, Dr. Kenneth Gonzalez, the last few slides about having to manually place the hole in the crown in CEREC. Is there a video on how to do this?
I do have a video on CEREC Doctors about doing this, and I will, Matt, I'll make sure that if I haven't already, I'll send you a video on it. And yes, the answer is I do have a video on it, and I'll make sure that that can be distributed.
Very good. Dr. Alex Quintner, can we create an STL file with our CEREC?
Yes, as long as you request a license. It's a there's not a fee for an STL license with CEREC, but you do have to call and request it. And once you have that STL license, you'll see it as an export option. As long as you've done a scan, you've created your model, and you take it through the model access step, when you hit export, you'll see an STL as an option to export that.
Very good. Dr. Luis Morales, again, it seems the driver does not have a stop. I actually was reading about that the other day. I would imagine you know the reason for that. But.
Well, the driver doesn't have a vertical stop on it, and that's correct. And that's important because the same driver is going to be used for multiple length implants. So that's why we have to use a vertical indexing line on that driver. And that's important to pay attention to, because that is different with other systems where the driver will have a vertical stop. And that's just to give you better options to be able to place multiple different implant lengths with the same driver.
And if you continued, if it did have a stop and you continued to drill that in, would you not strip out the osteotomy?
Well, I mean, absolutely. That's absolutely. I mean, if your implant continues to spin and you've hit that stop, then for sure that's a high risk of stripping your osteotomy. Yeah, good point.
Dr. Mary Bernardi asks, what's your success rate for immediate placed implants with Azento?
I can tell you that I haven't had a failure with it. I've only been using it for a relatively short time. Probably we're maybe at 6 or 9 months now. But understand this, Azento is just a system, and we get these questions a lot. It doesn't really matter what the entire package is. The components to it are not brand new, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. The actual implant is not a brand new implant. This is an implant that's been used for years and years. It has a very high success rate. The drills that are used for the osteotomy are not newly created drills. These are drills that have been used for years and years with a proven track record. The guide that we're using is a Simplant guide that's also been used for thousands of cases very successfully. The new component is that it's all put together in one place, and the restorative components are able to be pre-manufactured. So the Azento package, the packaging of this, would really have no difference in success than any of the other previous components.
Yeah, we are at the end of our allotted time, but if you have a minute or two more, Dan, there's a couple more questions for those who want to hang on.
I might have to open a bottle of wine, but yes, I'm good. No, I'm kidding.
Very good. Well, there's a couple of questions about irrigating while drilling. Dr. Sonia May Langton Yanowitz asks, do you irrigate while drilling? And I currently use a monojet to irrigate while drilling. Is there a better way to irrigate while drilling and using the surgical guide?
Yeah, I would say that I would much prefer to over irrigate, and any type of guided surgery, anytime you put a surgical guide, it is difficult for the irrigation to get through the guide into the osteotomy. And I think that the danger of overheating the bone with any guided system is real. So if I feel like I'm not getting enough fluid through my handpiece, where I do have water running through my handpiece as well, I do like you. I have a monoject syringe. My assistant is using that, and she's irrigating while I'm drilling, and then as I remove in between each drill, I'm irrigating again. So I'm all for using that as well.
Very good. Two more questions then. Dr. Alex Quintner, will we be able to get zirconia custom abutment components?
That's a good question for maybe you, Matt. I know through Atlantis it is an option at a later point. I don't believe that's an option in the initial Azento request for the abutment. You only have the option right now of doing either a gold-colored titanium abutment or a titanium-colored titanium abutment.
Correct. So if you wanted to have a final abutment be in zirconia, you can get a later abutment with the original files or with new files, depending on if you needed to take new scans. But you can get a zirconia abutment made at that time. But it's not available for the potential temporization purposes. Sometimes, the zirconia abutment material is not necessarily designed to be made as a temporary. So we made that decision not to include it that way, but it can be ordered later. And then the final question, I guess with one quick follow-up then on that from Dr. Quintner, I ask because it may offer more flexibility with tissue adaptation of the predetermined margin in the aesthetic zone. And would you like to answer that one first before there's one last question from Dr. Janet Rice? But
yeah, I mean,
thoughts on tissue adaptation?
Sorry, say it again.
Your thoughts on tissue adaptation in the aesthetic zone and how you manage that?
I mean, I think that's where it's key, and that's where Azento really shines, is in having tissue management. When you place a stock healing abutment, the only tissue management you're going to have is you're going to end up with a round circle. And by being able to, at the time of surgery, place something on that's going to start shaping your tissue to the actual shape of what your final crown is going to be, I think that's incredibly helpful, and that's one of the key features of the Azento is tissue management. So anterior restorations with this, that's in my mind, that's where the system shines.
Gotcha. Very good. Yeah, he said so you don't see the titanium if your margin is exposed, and I think that's sort of what you were addressing.
Oh, got you. So if you order an abutment and you end up with at time of healing, you see your restorative margin, is that going to be a problem? And potentially that is absolutely going to be a problem. So the way I kind of counteract that, because if you're not laying a flap and you're just doing a punch, you're going to be much more likely to be able to maintain your margin where you planned it. But if you do a flap and you're doing an immediate case, your margin could end up in a very different position. So the way that I like to at least give myself a chance, if I do a cement retained restoration, I'm going to tell them to place my margin a millimeter subgingival. That might not be enough. That's why I prefer to do a screw retained restoration, where I can have them position my margin as apical as they possibly can, because I'm going to be cementing those components extraorally, and I'm going to have a much better chance, even if I do get a little bit of tissue recession, of not seeing my margin of my abutment. Is that? I think that hopefully answers it.
Yeah, very good. So you go with the screw retained option to give yourself that room, and now with the Atlantis with screw access, abutment screw access, angulated screw access. Sorry, it's late. That option now available that enables more screw retained in the anterior as well.
Yeah, that's a huge deal to be able to pre-manufacture, plan your screw access, even though your implant may typically have the screw access through the buccal or the incisal. Being able to have that screw access repositioned to the lingual, just so that you do end up with a screw retained restoration, is kind of nice.
Very good. Well, the final question then is from Dr. Janet Rice. I'm a CERECDOC member. Can you briefly tell me tell where the videos are, your videos are?
Yes, they are under the implant section on CERECDOCtors. I'm like scrambling here because I'm not even sure I've ever watched any of my own videos. So they are for sure under the implant section of videos. and I have some, and Dr. Mike Schramstead has some. If you send me an email, I can shoot you a link, but I'm a little bit drawing a blank since I don't often again go and watch my own videos.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for staying around for a little bit later. Thank you, Dan, for a wonderful presentation and for great answers to a lot of wonderful questions.